Hey guys, welcome back to another video. Today what I want to talk about is what you can do with your bonsai during growth season. So what essential aspects and what essential pieces of work should be done in growth season with your bonsai in order to make sure that your tree grows the best way possible. And there is certain factors that play into that, and we will look at that today together. So this video should serve as a guide for you to really look into all the different aspects that you can do when it comes to working on your bonsai in growth season. And I will start already right with the first two factors. I will lump them together because I think they're the most basic ones, and that is watering and fertilizing. Especially when it comes to watering it, that is something you have to do anyway when it comes to working on your bonsai, no matter what season actually. But especially when switching from one season to the other season, it is very important that you take a look at your watering habits. I would say I wouldn't call it a schedule because I'm not really a fan of having a fixed watering schedule, but look at your watering habits and if they still fit to the environment your tree is in. Because in growth season, that environment changes. Of course, you will have higher temperatures, more sunlight, and that of course also affects how much water your tree uses. So definitely just take a moment, look at your trees. Do they use more water? Do you need to water more often? Do you need to water maybe a couple of times per day actually if you have your tree, for example, outside? That could be something that is actually the case. So definitely keep that in mind when it comes to watering in growth season. And also let's speak a little bit about fertilizing, because definitely fertilizing is something you can also do in the cold season, in the non-growing months, but especially in growth season when your tree needs those nutrients. It is definitely important to look at fertilizing and do it in a right way. So I usually now in really the high season of growth season fertilize almost every week, maybe every 10 days I would say that I fertilize. I use liquid fertilizer that really works well for me. I also have some trees in soil that have this slow releasing pearls of fertilizer basically in the soil. So that of course you have to then not use liquid fertilizer in addition, because then you run the risk of over fertilizing, which will also harm your tree then. So simply again, take a look at your tree, see how it's going with the fertilizer habits that you have right now. And if you see a lot of growth, maybe fertilize a little bit more, but simply don't overdo it. Don't fertilize with every watering, for example. That will surely harm your tree. But stick to a schedule between 1 or 2 weeks normally in growth season for most trees, especially indoor bonsai species, is completely fine. So another big aspect you should look at when it comes to the work you can do on your tree in summer and in growth season is of course pruning and pinching. Of course, growth season, as the name already implies, means we see a lot of growth on our trees, and that growth we need to manage. So why do we prune? One big aspect is to maintain the shape of your tree. Of course, if you let your tree run wildly and let it grow as free as possible, it will end up looking like a shrub more than it looks like a bonsai tree. So that is something you keep in mind when it comes to pruning. We do this also to maintain the overall shape of the tree. Another thing that pruning helps us with is actually to encourage new growth by cutting back new growth and also, of course, older branches when it comes to structural pruning. We again encourage the tree to grow from older parts of stems and branches, so we call that back budding, and that happens, for example, a lot on ficus, and it simply helps your tree to become more dense, more bushy looking, but while still keeping the overall shape and maintaining that design also. And that same is actually true also for pinching. So when you really take out the growth tips at the end of the branch, that also encourages the tree simply to get more dense foliage all around the tree. So what is the important thing about pruning? Simply look at it regularly, see if there's new growth. If it really starts to get leggy, then prune back. But again, here, of course, it is the balance you need to find. You don't need to prune back every leaf when it shows up out of place. You need to give the tree some room to grow first, to also develop finer branch structures, to thicken the trunk and the branches, and then you cut it back. Because this way you simply encourage the branches to still develop while maintaining the overall shape, and this way achieving a miniature looking tree. So it is really, again, as so often is the case with bonsai, the balance between letting nature do its thing and then taking these correcting steps or just these maintenance steps. And this way we create something that resembles nature but confined in a little pot, which is quite a nice thing in my opinion. One more aspect very much linked to pruning, because it already means you're getting your hands on your tree, is wiring. And wiring, I would put into two different things. That is applying new wire in growth season. So really taking also a look at your tree, seeing how the growth is developing at the moment, and applying wire to already direct this new growth in the direction and in the shape that you wanted. So of course, growth season is a good season for that, because we do see a lot of growth and a lot of new foliage appearing and new branches developing. And by already starting to wire these branches, once they start to harden a little bit in growth season, this allows us to really already move the tree in the shape and in the form that we desire in the end. The other part we should look at when it comes to wiring during growth season is actually checking the wire we have applied previously to our tree. So for example, early spring, winter, especially with deciduous trees, you can apply wire while they are bare, basically in the cold or dormant season. And this wire, of course, will start to bite into the branches sooner or later. And especially during growth season, when there is a lot of new growth, the branches are thickening, there is a big chance that your wire will start to bite into the bark. Especially, again, ficus, when we look at indoor bonsai, is a good example for that. They are fast growers, the branches get thick quite fast, and that wire, of course, will start to bite into those thickening branches, and this will leave very unsightly marks, and in a very end stage actually can harm the tree by basically hindering nutrients to go and flow freely through the branches and through all the foliage that it needs to reach. And that is why you also in growth season need to regularly check the wire you have previously applied, simply seeing where is it starting to bite a little bit into the branch, take off, remove that wire, and then reapply where needed, or where the tree has already settled in the desired shape. Of course, you can leave it then wire-free. Another big aspect is repotting, and that is something I'm a bit on the fence about actually putting in this video, because growth season is not the best season to repot. When we look now specifically at indoor bonsai, it can be done for most species. So for example, ficus can deal with repotting in summer quite well. Most succulents like jade tree or Poecilocaria afra can also deal with it, but that is already what they can do. They deal with it. It's not the best time for them to also be repotted. The best time for most trees actually is in late winter, early spring, before any growth shows, because when the tree is still dormant, the repotting is less of a shock to the entire system of this tree, because when you take out this tree from its pot, you lay its root bare to the environment and then repot it, this tree goes into a shock. And that is definitely more risky during growth season, where the tree simply needs a lot of nutrients, a lot of water, because overall the temperatures are higher. If you do it during dormant season, where most trees are anyway not as active, this can be way easier on the entire system of the tree. But again, as I said, with especially some indoor bonsai varieties, you can repot in summer. I would rather see it, however, as something you do as an emergency repot. So if you can see your tree is in soil that is simply not fitting, your tree is deteriorating even though it is growth season, and everything else you do to take care of your tree is actually working and should be working, but your tree is still deteriorating, that could be a sign that you need to repot right away. And then also growth season can be the right season to repot for those trees. But it's very, again, case-based, I would say. So look at that tree, and if you really see it is deteriorating in summer, then do take those steps and repot. But if you have the chance, always wait rather for late winter, early spring to repot. Your tree will thank you, because it simply is so much easier on the tree itself. Something that I have actually seen is that especially succulents like jade and Poecilocaria, as I mentioned, can deal with that actually quite easily, because as succulent trees, they go without water for such a long period anyway, that even if you repot them in the height of growth season and they go in this sort of shock and they shrivel up and they really try to get water, but the root's not really pulling enough water because they have been disturbed right now, that normally works for jade and Poecilocaria afra, because they are so used to it. So they go through a dry season anyway, so for them repotting in summer actually does work quite nicely still. Another big factor that comes into working on your tree in growth season is of course pest and disease control. That is something you also should keep in mind. Often in growth season, if you have the chance, we also take our indoor bonsai that we have and put them outside. I, for example, have many of my trees on my balcony in growth season, where they get nice indirect sunlight. they can simply grow way better there because they get more sunlight, they get the fresh air, I think even that helps a little bit, the natural humidity that occurs outside. So it really does help those trees to be outside for at least a period of time where in my climate it allows me to put them outside. But that of course also comes with looking at pests and diseases. You also have to do this, of course, with your trees inside, but I find that the disease control and pest control I have to do mainly is in the dormant state, because the trees inside do tend to suffer a little bit more during dormancy, because that is sort of the season that doesn't really mimic the best inside, because the temperatures are often a bit too high for them to really go into dormancy, and then you can see many of the usual pests and diseases happening. Fungal diseases if it's too humid or if you leave it too long in a moist soil, spider mites if the humidity is not high enough, scale, for example, happening. But that is often something I'd rather see in winter. Nevertheless, you should also take a look in summer and always simply, when you maintain your trees, when you water them, when you fertilize them, go through the foliage, check if you can see any signs of a pest or a sign of any disease happening on your tree. It is quite easy to do, and if you catch it early, it is so much easier to treat. And also, when you put your trees outside, you might have to deal with other pests than you might expect. I, for example, have a pomegranate tree on my balcony, a dwarf pomegranate tree that it's basically at a pre-bonsai stage right now. And I have seen that come spring, there have been many ants actually crawling up and down that tree. So that is maybe not the usual pest you can find on a tree that you keep inside. But if that tree is outside, yes, you also might at that point have to deal with ants. And then again, it is important that you have a look at the tree, you notice it early enough, and then you take the measures to deal with it. Something slightly adjacent to that is actually the lighting situation that you can work on and actually really take into account and take measures with regards to your bonsai tree. And what I mean with that is, as I mentioned, you can take your trees that are inside where they also in summer, of course, receive more light. But if you have the possibility to take them outside, why not do that in summer, where they can deal with the temperatures anyway quite well. And it's more actually what they are used to in nature anyway, which will benefit your tree, the growth and the health of the tree also. But it also comes with certain risks, of course. When you take this tree out of its environment inside, where it gets very filtered indirect light, and now you would go, let's say in May or in June, and just put it out in the sun, this tree will probably not make it, most likely, because it is not used to this harsh direct sunlight that you would put it out then in. So it always has to be a gradual move from the inside to the outside. Of course, the earlier it is possible for you to take it outside, when temperatures are not yet too high, when the sun might not be as strong yet, then it is easier to make that transition. Otherwise, really think of it as it is also true for people. If you're inside the entire day and all winter and then you go out on the first day in the sun, you will get sunburned. And the same thing will happen to your trees. It will damage the foliage. The tree might bounce back. If you leave it out there, it might not bounce back. So the light conditions are definitely something you can work on and you can really make use of also in summer to benefit your tree, but do it with care and do it also with certain steps in between until you arrive at a point where your tree is outside and also gets direct sunlight, because most of the day it should anyway be indirect sunlight. So it is outside, it is bright, but the sun is not shining directly on the leaves the entire day. That normally is the best for your trees. You can work with netting to protect your trees. You can simply position it in already naturally shadier places, then it will work for your tree. But that is something to keep in mind when you want to make use of the light conditions outside during growth season. One more point is actually humidity, and that is also something normally that plays a more important role in winter indoors. But now, when we again talk about indoor bonsai, maybe also putting them out during growth season, or simply also changing their conditions because you have your windows open more often, for example, during growth season, the humidity will again shift in your house as well as outside. And that can really differ, of course, where you are situated, geographically speaking. Here in Central Europe, growth season means higher humidity, for example, at least here in Austria more specifically. And that high humidity actually is beneficial for most of the trees I have. So my ficus are quite happy when there is high humidity. My succulents deal with it, I would say, also quite well. And that's why I can put my trees outside and they do well and don't need to really worry about them being in a too dry condition. But if you live in an area where in summertime or in growth time, the air is very arid, so there's no humidity in the air, that might be something to keep in mind. Can you put your trees outside then? Do you need even inside work with increasing the humidity then more than it is naturally actually? And that is again something when it comes to bonsai you might need to work on during growth season. The humidity levels. So maybe look into something like misting or humidity trays. In my opinion, they don't really work that well. I often feel like a little tray of water or misting once or twice a day isn't really increasing the overall humidity enough in my trees. But maybe also look at other options like electric humidifiers, for example, that you can really create a little small environment in your indoor space that doesn't have to mean you're increasing the entire humidity in the entire room. That is something you don't normally have to do, but maybe create a somewhat confined space where you have your trees, where you can put a humidifier also inside there, and that way, of course, then also increase the humidity, even though you live in more arid places, where in summer your trees might struggle because it gets too hot, too dry, and this way you might counteract that a little bit. One aspect I also want to talk about is weeding, and that is something that is very much linked to growth season, because not only your trees are growing during that time, also all the weeds that can be found in your trees and in your pots can grow at that time. The risk for that happening, of course, again, is simply bigger if you have your trees outside with wind just carrying seeds to the pots of your bonsai trees where then weeds are growing. But this also can happen inside. It can be contaminated soil. It can be soil that you bring your tree in from a garden center or a nursery that already has seeds and simply growing weeds in there that then you transfer also to your pot. And those, especially during growth season, also will show up. And then again, the important thing is just to keep ahead of it, to have simply a close look at your trees. When you spot any weeds growing, just pull them out. That's all there is to it. Simply don't let them grow too wildly, because of course those weeds also need nutrients to grow, which means your tree itself has less nutrients available in the soil, in this confined container it is in. So why should we leave our tree competing with another plant for nutrients if we can simply remove that plant from the pot and have our tree get all the nutrients that it needs? So simply also take out any weeds you see in growth season. So there you have it, a couple of factors that play a big role in maintaining and working on your trees during growth season. Many, of course, of these things are basic. You also do them somewhat in winter, but again, it comes to simply adjusting them to the season, working on your tree as necessary, because the environment around it changes, the tree patterns themselves changes, the growth patterns change. So important is that you take the time to really observe those changes, observe how your tree is doing, and then simply adjust what you do to provide your tree with the best environment accordingly. And this way your tree will definitely thrive during growth season, can make the most out of growth season, which also means, of course, a lot of new growth that you can then work on and use as a basis to create the style and the idea that you have for that tree. So happy bonsai work. Hope I see you in the next video. Until then, take care.